Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Southern Maryland Audubon. And we have multiple other organizations that are on tonight. In fact, if any of you would like to put which organizations you're representing in the chat room, that would be great for our speakers to know. And we're really happy to have Dan Murphy, Chief of the Division of Habitat Restoration for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Jennifer Greiner, Refuge Manager at the Patuxent Research Refuge. And they're going to go over the proposed new Southern Maryland Woodlands National Wildlife Refuge, which will cover Anne Arundel, Calvert, Charles, Prince George's, and St. Mary's counties. A great opportunity for Southern Maryland and for Maryland. And I'm going to turn the meeting over to you two now. And since we have so many folks on the call, we'd love for you to wait till the end to ask your questions, because many of them might get answered as we move along here.
All right, Jennifer, are you there? I don't see you.
Oh, you can?
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Okay.
So Jen's going to start the presentation and I'm going to finish it off. So go ahead, Jennifer.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. Nice to be with the Southern Maryland Audubon Group this evening and have such a great turnout. Thanks for inviting us. I'm Jennifer Greiner, and I am privileged to be the refuge manager at lovely Patuxent Research Refuge, which of course is named after the river, which is named after the tribe. I've been there for coming up on 4 years now, and with the Fish and Wildlife Service for over 30 years. And it is a real honor to be working on this project with Dan and coming in sort of at the tail end of what has been a really long effort. And we're going to go into the progression of it over the course of nearly 15 years in the making now. We're excited to share how this effort is looking to bring the protections afforded by the National Wildlife Refuge System into the southern portion of our state of Maryland. Places that look kind of like this on the cover slide. Go ahead, Dan. So you're likely familiar with the mission of the National Wildlife Refuge System, which is to manage a network of lands and waters for the conservation of fish, wildlife, plants, and their habitats. You might be a bit less familiar with the process for establishing a new unit of the refuge system. And that really involves 3 steps. And those are crafting a preliminary project proposal, or a PPP, translating that into a design, a landscape conservation design, or an LCD, and then progressing to step 3, which is where we're at now, which is the land protection plan, or LPP, and an environmental assessment that accompanies that. So it's really moving from conceptual to blueprint to getting it implemented, and that's where we're at today. And as you can imagine, it's a highly deliberate process to add a new unit of the refuge system. It's highly collaborative at all stages. We collaborate at each of these 3 steps with local organizations such as yours, tribal governments, federal, state, county agencies, NGOs, to align the needs of plants, wildlife, and their habitats with the needs of people, such as birders. Go ahead. So this zoomed out gives you a concept of the holdings of the National Wildlife Refuge System in the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware coastal bays. You can see up there toward the north end, Patuxent Research Refuge, sort of anchoring on the north toward the center. And then flowing down the river from that, you see an area of red hash outline, and it's really a gap in the system. And you can see some of the other refuges in green around the map, including the Rappahannock River Valley National Wildlife Refuge down to the south. And this area in red is going to fill in, try to help close that gap in Southern Maryland for the refuge system. And we are really looking at the Rappahannock Refuge as a model because it was based on a landscape scale approach to conservation. And we're employing that same concept here in the draft evaluation area. Next slide.
It's easy for you to say. Now it's stopped on me.
It's stuck.
Yeah. Um. So Jennifer and I use Teams, and recently this thing's been we've been having issues with this on other formats. I'm going to try and stop sharing and then try and share again.
Okay. And I don't know if you have your big monitor on.
No, I don't.
That was that's what messed us up last week, I think, on my, so I switched to my small monitor. So I'll fill the space a little bit by saying that, again, a lot of the other refuges that you're seeing here in green, were really, place-based and sort of tightly, Patuxent Research Refuge was created in 1936. So we're actually approaching our 90th birthday, in a couple of years. And it's the only one in the refuge system dedicated first and foremost to wildlife focused research. The Rappahannock Refuge is really based more on a landscape scale approach.
Jen,
Yeah.
can you see this?
Nope.
Okay, I might not be sharing at the moment. Share. Okay.
Yep, we can see you.
Yeah, it's
Then,
this is interesting. I can't seem to. What about now? Is that advancing the slide?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh.
so down two more.
All right, I know what to do. I figured it out. I'm gonna have to leave it on this presentation mode if that's okay.
Okay,
All right. Sorry,
Yeah.
everybody.
go ahead, one more down.
Okay.
So we're gonna zoom in now on that area that was shown in the red hash mark. And this is the area of interest and the potential acquisition boundary that we've established for what we're calling the Southern Maryland Woodlands National Wildlife Refuge. It is proposed, and it will cover really focusing in on 4 watershed-based units and going clockwise down from Patuxent again in the brown, to down the lower Patuxent Calvert unit, swinging around clockwise to the McIntosh Run St. Mary's unit. Further to the west, the Zakiah Swamp Wycomico unit, and finally the Nan Des Moines Matterhorn unit. So this is all based on the premise of strategic landscape conservation. So not, one species at a time or one habitat at a time, but looking really holistically across the landscape. And this effort started back in 2011 with the first of that 3-step process that I mentioned, the preliminary project proposal, which was approved back in 2011 by the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Following that, the service released a new policy guiding the growth of the National Wildlife Refuge system strategically for the future. And that policy is really guiding this product, and Dan's going to get more into that in a few minutes. Then from 2014 to 2018, step 2 was completed, and we called that the Patuxent Waters Landscape Conservation Design. A lot of people had played an active role in that. And then that brings us to from the blueprint to really implementation. And that's really been championed by a group called the Southern Maryland Conservation Alliance, which organized in 2021. And the work really began at that point on this scoping process for step 3, this land protection plan. And we're pleased to say that we have at this point really good support from both local organizations and the state of Maryland. That's thanks in large part to the active work of the Southern Maryland Conservation Alliance, which is a partnership of 46 different conservation and community groups. You can see their mission statement there in the center. They're really about conserving and restoring the landscapes, waterways, shorelines that are special in Southern Maryland, not just for the economy and culture, but also for native fish, wildlife, and plants. And on the core team for this Southern Maryland Woodlands project, we have many of the SCMA members themselves, including organizations that you see represented there in the bottom of the slide. Land trusts, Maryland DNR, Chesapeake Conservancy, counties. So bringing us to the scoping and prioritization effort that we are in the middle of now. We've released that draft, and so we are in formal scoping. We have been coordinating over the past year with local governments and state agencies. We have advanced, this product advances interior and service, Fish and Wildlife Service, I should say, trust resource responsibilities. We are supporting administration priorities, including climate resilience, environmental justice, and tribal co-stewardship through this effort. The areas of interest for protection, as you will see, represent the overall greatest ecological values based on a pretty complex mapping system that looks at different data layers. A director-approved land protection plan will provide the Fish and Wildlife Service with the authority to acquire from willing sellers up to 40,000 acres in direct fee acquisition or conservation easements. Those 4 focus areas across 5 counties in Maryland over a pretty long period of time, 30-year time span.
Wow.
So it's a big, broad effort in time and space. And all of this is guided by that policy on strategic growth for the National Wildlife Refuge system. And with that, I'm gonna pass it to Dan to delve into some of those details.
All right, thanks, Jen. And I should note that I am actually with the Chesapeake Bay Field Office of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're located in Annapolis. So Jen's with our Refuges Division, and I'm with what's called the Ecological Services Division. And in ecological services, we work throughout a given territory. So we can work on public lands, private lands, public lands and private lands, I should say. And my area where our office focuses is Maryland, parts of Delaware, parts of Virginia, and Washington, D.C. And for the last 20 or so years, I've been focusing mostly within that area on land protection and habitat restoration, and also more recently, landscape scale planning. And so that's why I'm involved in, I'm working with Jen on proposing, developing the justification for proposing this landscape scale refuge in Southern Maryland. So Jennifer mentioned the strategic growth policy. Whenever we want to expand a refuge boundary or create a new national wildlife refuge, we have to show our leadership that we are contributing to the priorities of this refuge system strategic growth policy. And those are, there are 3 categories. One is contribute to the recovery of threatened and endangered species. That's federally threatened and endangered species. Implementing the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. That's, basically protecting waterfowl populations and their habitat. And then conserving birds of migratory birds of conservation concern. And those are birds that are listed in these various bird plans that are of concern because their populations and or their habitat have been declining. And so for Southern Maryland, when we looked at the landscape, we were able to determine that we had 28 birds of conservation concern. So that was good. We were able to show it's good in a way, but we were able to show our leadership that there were birds that needed conservation within this. Land birds, shore birds, water birds. And we also have 8 federally listed species, 3 of which have land protection listed as a priority in their recovery plans. For each endangered or threatened species, there's a recovery plan, and 3 of the species that occur in Southern Maryland have land protection identified as a priority. And then there's waterfowl, and I think we're all familiar with the rivers and wetlands of Southern Maryland and how important they are to waterfowl. We see that every migration season and every winter when we are visited by thousands of them. There's also a new category called at-risk species that we also that's been added. And these are species we're trying to keep. These are species that are at risk for being placed on the endangered species list. We're trying to keep them off the endangered species list. So I have examples here. At-risk species examples are the scarlet tanager and the prothonotary warbler. Federally listed species are the 2 of them are the tiger beetle, the Puritan tiger beetle, and the dwarf wedge mussel. Puritan tiger beetle occurs over at Calvert Cliffs, and dwarf wedge mussel occurs in Southern Maryland. It occurs in Nanjemoy Creek and McIntosh Run. And then we have the birds of I got that backwards. The tanager and the prothonotary warbler are birds of conservation concern. Over here we have at-risk species. The wood thrush, the monarch butterfly, and the spotted turtle. So the spotted turtle is not a bird of conservation concern. So as Jen noted before, we've identified 4 units that we are proposing for the National Wildlife Refuge System in Southern Maryland. And these units, we identified these areas based on how they adhere to the refuge system strategic growth priority. So wherever you see a color that's not black is an area that's important for something. And some of these places, a lot of these places, have multiple colors and various hash marks and dots that are that occur over them. And so these are areas that have federally listed species. They have habitat for birds of conservation concern, waterfowl, and waterfowl. So Jen showed you the before the Rappahannock River Valley National Wildlife Refuge and how that is being used as a model, as a landscape scale refuge for what we're trying to do. Rappahannock River Valley, they have a 260,000 acre acquisition boundary. Within that acquisition boundary, they proposed back in the 1990s to protect 20,000 acres using Fish and Wildlife Service refuge funds. And then they work through it. The refuge works throughout that landscape with their partners to use other people's money, partner money, state money, NGO money to protect, to basically plan, target, and protect additional parcels. So that's what we're talking about here. We've identified a 577,000 acre acquisition boundary. So those 4 units compose 577,000 acres. Within that area, we have identified 170,000 acres of parcels that are in these areas of importance for migratory birds, federally listed species, and waterfowl that are greater than 20 acres. We set 20 acres as our minimum acreage for bringing it into the refuge system in this case, greater than 20 acres, and that are unprotected. So, and within that 170,000 acres of unprotected parcels, we are looking to protect 40,000 acres over 30 years within those 4 units. And I should note that I mentioned black. Anywhere that's not black is an important area. The black areas are the priority funding areas that have been identified by the counties, where the counties want to put development. And so they are black because it's showing that we are not going to be working there, because that would interfere with the plan, the local government plans for where they're trying to be smart with their planning and put development in the right places. And also I want to draw your attention to the to the dashed green line up above Nanjamoy and Zakaya here. So that is identifying what we're calling our partnership area. And basically the partnership area is everything south of that line that's white on this map. So even though these are 500,000 acres of acquisition boundary, they're still under threat of becoming ecological islands. So we have to also work within the areas between our fish and wildlife refuge units. And so that's where offices like mine that can work anywhere are gonna focus our efforts, make an effort to put our programs on the ground for land protection, restoration within that area outside the acquisition boundary. We'll also be working inside the acquisition boundary where the refuge system will be working as well. So I mentioned that we've identified 170,000 acres of parcels that are greater than 20 acres, that are unprotected, that are in areas that are real important for fish and wildlife. Well, this is what it looks like. We've identified all those parcels in each of these units. And so all these green polygons are properties that are unprotected, that are in areas that are important for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Trust Resources or Refuge System priority, strategic growth priorities. And there's a lot of gaps between these green spaces. We have another map that shows where all the protected lands are, and if I had that up here, you'd be able to see how what we're proposing here complements what's already been protected. We're filling in the blanks basically with what we're proposing to do. The darker green parcels are, we had a ranking system from 1 to 6 based on how many of the priorities of the refuge system properties satisfy, and also whether they fall within state of Maryland's green infrastructure areas or targeted ecological areas. And so the dark green are the ones that ranked the highest. So they would be priorities if and when we're given the permission to establish a refuge. So we've been through quite a process here in this land protection planning phase. It's also an environmental assessment under the National Environmental Policy Act. So it's sort of the legal document that's gonna basically outline what we plan to do, and that will ultimately be hopefully approved by the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and it involves the public. So just a little bit of history of the land protection plan. Back in September of 2022, we held what we called a stakeholder meeting. It was virtual, and we invited all the various state, federal, and NGO organizations that we were used to working with, the Fish and Wildlife Service, to a meeting to float this idea of an expanded refuge in Southern Maryland too. And there, I should note that there were also state delegates, state senators, county government, and also the 3 state recognized Piscataway tribes. And we had 90 people attend that. And the response was overwhelmingly positive. Some of you on this call may have been involved in that stakeholder meeting. We are also required to consult with the federally recognized tribes, and there's 3 federally recognized tribes. They're in Oklahoma, and so we have also been coordinating with them on what we have planned. We had 3 public listening sessions last spring. There was one at Patuxent Refuge, there was one at the Charles County Administration Building, and one at the Calvert Marine Museum. And we had, all told, probably close to 150 people attended those 3 meetings, between the 3 meetings. So we got a fairly decent turnout there. We also established a public-facing website. That's an email address that some of you may have seen this, because we just released a press release for the 45-day public comment period that we do under the during this process. And that has just opened up, the 45-day public comment period. And what I can do is I can pause here for a second if folks want to write this email address down to submit comments, but if you can actually, if you contact Molly, I can provide you with frequently asked questions through email that will answer some of your questions as well. And we've also done presentations like this upon request. And since we did the public release of the land protection plan, this is our third request since March 8th. So this is great. We're getting the word out. So this is where we've been. We are going to incorporate the information we get into the plan that's out that we get via the public 45-day public review that ends on April 22nd. And then hopefully we're going to get it in front of the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service for approval. And then it'll be published. And at that point, the acquisition boundary will be established. It will be legally established. But the refuge itself won't be established until we purchase that first parcel. And I should note that I'm not sure we made this clear. We're not just purchasing. We're not proposing to purchase land just in fee. We're also planning to purchase conservation easements on land as well. That's where the landowner sells their development rights, but they maintain ownership of the property. And so the acquisition boundary will be established, but the refuge won't be established until we have that first parcel. So right now we're looking for donations, because once the acquisition boundary is established, it will most likely take 2 years before we get the funding to purchase that first parcel, because it is or first conservation easement, because it is a competitive process, and we basically have to submit like a grant proposal to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and it's, we're competing with other refuges across the country. So that's it in a nutshell. I think we can take some questions now, and sorry for the issues with our slideshow. We're going to have to iron that out, because obviously that's kind of frustrating. Molly?
That was great. Thank you guys both. So if folks have questions, why don't you unmute yourself and feel free to ask them. And I'm going to start with one, actually, for whichever of you would like to take it. So you said that the refuge will kind of get launched when you get your first acquisition. If people see that their land is in these areas and, would like you to buy their conservation easements, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, so I should say that, we have the Southern Maryland Conservation Alliance. Some of you on this call are members of the Southern Maryland Conservation Alliance. It's headed up by the American Chestnut Land Trust and the Maryland Environmental Trust. We have all the local land trusts within Southern Maryland out there. We're going to have them out there on the landscape, hopefully bringing us landowners, right? But if somebody has on this call has a piece of property that they're interested in potentially either selling a conservation easement on, they can send information to this email address that I have up here. I put it back up here so that people can write it down, or to my email, Dan_Murphy, and then it's the ending is the same as this email, @fws.gov. So it's Dan_Murphy, and I'll take a look at it on GIS and give you an idea whether it would be competitive for the refuge program, and then we'll put you on a list of willing sellers, basically. And that we obviously are going to be prioritizing what we spend our money on, but it could be that it turns out to, that your property turns out to be a priority, and then we'll be wanting to talk to you sooner rather than later. Yeah.
See another question from Janet about taking care of the properties. And I can address that one.
Sure.
Yes, there will be passive recreation opportunities, definitely. Perhaps some more active recreational opportunities as well. I'm imagining that some of these properties will be actively hunted and fished, depending on the interests of the landowner. And at some point, we'll reach a critical mass where we need to establish a refuge management presence down in the region. That won't be immediate, but at some point, the land included in this Southern Maryland Refuge will reach a point where we need to have probably an office or co-located office and some staff. So if there are trails to be maintained, that sort of thing, we're going to need to have staff and take care of them. Otherwise, it would be more on the passive side. So I imagine it'll be a spectrum, and that will evolve.
Yeah, and I should note that if we buy your property in fee, that means obviously we own it. And so all those things have a potential for occurring on that piece of property. If we purchase a conservation easement from you or from a landowner, it's a negotiation, right? Some landowners, a lot of private landowners don't want public access on their property. And if your property is important enough in terms of providing fish and wildlife habitat, we'll be much more interested in just protecting it, right? Potentially, and not allowing any public access. But it'll be a negotiation, will you allow it, or how much will you allow, that kind of thing. I guess, should I call on people? Earl?
Yeah, I'm with the Anne Arundel group at the Sierra Club, and I was wondering what you're looking for groups such as us to be involved and help this process along.
Yeah, so right now we are taking public comments, and folks can submit public comments in support or against the refuge individually, or like in the case of the Sierra Club, Anne Arundel, I think you said.
Yeah, well, also involved with the chapter as well, which is
yeah. In the case of the Anne Arundel chapter of the Sierra Club, the chapter itself could submit a letter to us as well. So we'll take them either way. Either or from an organization, from individual members of an organization, or both. And that would be a great help at this.
You will have a list of key objectives you may want to have us include in a letter of support.
Oh, that's a really good question. I think, we have a frequently asked questions document that I'd really like to send out to everybody on this call if you haven't already seen it. We've been sending it out with, as we get with hopefully with the public notice it went out for the review, public review period. But I'll just say, you can send a request to that email message that's up there, that email address that's up here, or you can send it to my email address, dan_Murphy@fws.gov, and I'll send you the frequently asked questions document. And that should probably help folks, sort of identify what maybe they might want to put in a letter or of support or an email of support.
And Dan, this is Molly. We will be happy to push that out to all the lists that we sent this notice out to, and ask folks to spread it around too.
All right, well, let's try that, Molly. That would be great. Yeah.
And the FAQs are also on the website.
Right. And which isn't up there. It's not on the slide. But we'll get it out there.
I saw a couple questions again about uses on the lands that would be included in the refuge. access be available for mountain biking, hiking, and equestrian activities. Yes, I think largely, I'm not sure about the equestrian activities. I know that at Patuxent, we have horseback riding. And it's sort of a rare use on lands in the refuge system overall. But there's a group in Maryland called Trail Riders of Today that was very active in advocating for that to be included in Patuxent's allowed uses of the property. And so we have horseback riding at Patuxent. So that is possible and could well extend down into refuge lands in the southern part of the state. Biking, hiking, absolutely. Hunting, fishing, wildlife associated recreation, nature photography, education, interpretation. I mean, those are the big 6 uses of the refuge system that are allowed on lands in the system, as long as Dan mentioned, if it's purchase of an easement, then the landowner has a say in what will or will not be allowed there. So again, this is a mosaic approach. We're knitting together a big quilt, and there will be some properties where the Fish and Wildlife Service is allowing those big 6 uses, and there will be other properties that are managed differently.
Yeah, and this is a plan to basically hopefully establish the refuge, right? Once the refuge is established and we start acquiring lands, we're going to have to develop management plans for those. And a lot of those have to go out for public review. So it will give people the opportunity to comment on what we plan to do with the properties that we acquire. And one of those will be, if somebody's interested in seeing horseback riding, they can make that comment, during that period.
And there's a question about use of LWCF funds
Yes.
for purchase.
Yeah, so there's 2 sources of funding that we use: the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which comes from oil leases on the continental shelf. That's where the money comes from, and that's funded permanently at like somewhere around 900,000 a year, 900 million, $900 million a year, which is great. It's not just for fish and wildlife refuges. It's for national parks. In some cases, it's for state parks, that kind of thing. So so that's one source. The other source is the Migratory Bird Fund, which comes from duck stamps, federal duck stamps. When you buy a duck stamp, the money goes into that fund and it's used to purchase land for the refuge system.
And following up on that, Deborah was also asking about any restrictions associated with lands that are purchased with LWCF funds. Restrictions on things like building an environmental education center, farming, those sorts of things.
Well, Jen, I want to say no. In fact, I think LWCF funds can be used for things like building, refuge headquarters and things like that. So.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with restrictions,
Yeah, they can't be used for an education center or a research center or farming, or there's a lot of restrictions.
Well, when in case of an easement, in case of a conservation easement, I think that on private land, farming would still be permitted.
So easements I'm not sure of. I just know about purchase land because where I'm employed is facing the issue.
Yeah, and so the Fish and Wildlife Service used to have a lot of agricultural lands, throughout the country. And we like that because it attracted waterfowl, and it helped feed waterfowl over the winter. But we're kind of growing away from that, and so we're turning the lands that we own that were agricultural fields, in many cases, not in all cases, back into habitat. I see Bill. Bill's got his hand up.
Yeah, there's questions in the
Sorry,
chat.
Jen.
Lots of hands up. So.
Okay.
Yeah, Dan, I had a question that's, well, I have 2 questions. The first one's more technical. So if one has a parcel of land that fits what you're looking for, is there acquisition size limit? Because in the plan, it mentions 20 acres several times.
Yes, so the minimum that we're looking at is 20 acres. But if a 5 acre property connects, is a connector or a corridor between two bigger properties, we would take a look at that. So that's an exception, is we don't want to like walk away from a nice corridor, movement corridor between two, big habitat hubs. So it would be worth sharing it at some point. If a landowner were interested and they didn't have 20 acres, there's still potential there, depending on its importance as a movement corridor.
Okay, a second question, if I might. What's the opposition to this? Or is, hopefully there isn't any, but is the opposition? And when people post their comments, will we be able to see those comments? And maybe we can rebut them?
Oh, no, you won't be able to see the comments because, but you will be able to see, you won't be able to rebut them either because you won't be able to
Darn.
see them. But they will go in the final so right now we have this land protection plan that's out for review. After we get all of our comments, we're going to have to summarize those in that document. So the document is not complete yet because we need to incorporate the public comments. But as far as what kind of response we've been getting, overwhelmingly positive. We really have not. We've got, I'd say 98% of the comments that we've gotten since September of 2022, when that first stakeholder meeting, have been people who are in support. In fact, and I, there's folks on this call that may have been on the receiving end of this, but I mean, one of our main criticisms is, why wasn't a certain watershed included, in our plan? And that's something that somebody can submit as part of the public comment period as well. They can submit an email to us posing that question, should they feel it important to do so.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. All right. Is there any other?
See it's hard to see all the hands. I know there were hands up, but I'm not sure we're seeing all of them, so.
Molly, can you see all the hands?
No, I can't either, actually. So if
Oh.
folks have had their hands up, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I think yeah. Oh, Earl Bradley.
Yeah. I was just wondering, I noticed that almost all of Calvert County seems to be in your area of interest.
Yeah. Yeah, so in the case of
how that relates to their ag preservation programs and other sort of efforts, and what are you prioritizing the highest potential in there?
Yeah, so I would say that all the agricultural programs, including MALF, the state's agricultural program, land protection program, they complement each other, right? I mean, we might not be protecting, our focus is fish and wildlife, right? But having agricultural land next to refuge land is a buffer from development. Protected agricultural land is good, as far as we're concerned. As far as Calvert County goes, one of the reasons Anne Arundel and Prince George's and the northern part of Calvert are important to this effort is that we're trying to maintain a connection from the existing Patuxent Refuge, which is that brown polygon right up at the top of the map, to habitat to the south. And so that's one of the reasons that the acquisition boundary goes all the way up to the refuge. In the case of Calvert, it's got real important, first of all, it's got the Patuxent River. It's got real important habitat for migratory birds. and for birds of conservation concern. It also has cliffs that are important to the Puritan tiger beetle, which is a federally listed, I can't remember whether it's threatened or endangered species, and the southeastern beach tiger beetle. And so that's why we're going all the way over to the Chesapeake shoreline there, because that's a very important area for us.
But how do you link the areas along the Tuxet River with the shorelines along the Chesapeake Bay?
Yeah, so I mean, you can see that there are linkages, right? And so we're going to try and protect those linkages from the river to the bay, you know, and where there's habitat that we can do it in. That's going to be something we're going to want to do. And you know, we mentioned this before. We are not just spending, you know, we're going to protect 40,000 acres within this 500,000 acre acquisition boundary. We're working with our partners, state and NGO, you know, local land trusts, to protect other acreage within this area. And that is definitely something that we all have our eye on, is keeping those connections there, free from development.
I think Bernie and JWA have hands up.
Thank you. Bernie Robinson, Anne Arundel Group Sierra Club. So the northernmost boundary appears to be the somewhat upper section of Patuxent or Little Patuxent Rivers. Will the Fort Meade installation in the upwaters of all this heading downstream have any can they, or will they, is there any relationship or impact with them, or co-relationship?
Yeah, so Jen can speak to this too, but I'll just say that Fort Meade, and you may know this already, Bernie, but a huge chunk of Fort Meade was transferred to the Refuge several years back. And so that's being,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And so, and I understand that what's left is undergoing lots of development. One thing they're trying to do is limit the amount of degradation that development causes, and which is a good thing. I mean, I know that they're trying to, you know, restore streams and do that kind of thing, because there's folks from my office that are helping with that. But that's all I can speak to there. Jen, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you nailed it. You know, we got we got 8,000 acres from Fort Meade back in 1991 that they didn't want. So that's been conserved now as part of Patuxent. What they still have at Fort Meade is being really actively developed. You know, they're a good neighbor, but they're developing actively on the fort. I do think that there are opportunities like at Patuxent River Naval Air Station and there are things we can work with DOD on down in the southern portion. And that's definitely a possibility.
Thank you.
JWA, and then I think Lisa.
Yes, thanks, Dan and Jennifer, for giving us really informative talk tonight. So I have a bit of a question that may seem slightly parochial or too far down in the weeds, but I'm wondering if I've got a piece of land that is in your zone and that is suitable for inclusion in the refuge, but I want to keep my home in my family for years to come or whatever. And let's say I've got 25 acres, I've got an acre for my house, an acre of driveway, so I've got 23 acres. Could that be included in your refuge? How do you decide how many of those 23 acres are suitable for inclusion, and do I get compensated for it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Those are, yeah, we're getting really specific there. But if we were to buy a conservation easement from you, the house would stay, the barns would stay, you know, and we'd we'd agree to that up front. So if it was a really important parcel and it was 23 acres and 18 acres of it was habitat and the rest was, whatever ag fields and residential area, we might still have something to talk about. That's all I can say. Hope that helps.
Okay, thanks.
Lisa.
Hello. As a former board member at the Friends of Patuxent Wildlife Research Refuge, we worked very hard to get the National Wildlife Visitor Center built. Thought it was a very important thing to have a visitor center. So in this future project, Dan, where do you guys see the center or some kind of refuge headquarters? Where do you see it going to be at?
Right. We don't know yet. We're establishing this boundary and then we need to get, and we're going to get to work on protecting land. So we don't know where that's going to be yet, Lisa. Initially it's going to be handled out of Patuxent. So it's,
Okay.
Jennifer will be the lead initially until we get enough lands far enough away from the existing refuge that we need to staff that area.
You're saying once you get the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall together and you see
Right.
where your largest piece of land is, that will be your headquarters in the future.
Right. Personally, I have my ideas, but I'm going to keep those quiet for now, but yeah.
A lot of people have ideas and maybe hopes along those lines, but we'll just really have to see how it shakes out, Lisa. Hopefully it'll be somewhat clear where it makes sense and ought to be. And I think maybe a related question I saw in the chat was related to will any of the parcels be large enough to have a wildlife drive similar to what they have at Bombay Hook or Blackwater? I think that that goes with the question of a refuge headquarters for this unit. It would make sense to have the headquarters and maybe a much more humble than the National Wildlife Visitor Center type of building, education facility with some sort of a wildlife loop trail or drive would make sense in my mind, but we'll just have to see what properties present and seem appropriate for that.
Thank you for your work on this. This is a very exciting project.
Earl, your hand is up, or is that still up, or?
It's still up if no one else wants to ask the question. I was just wondering what sort of outreach you've had with the county ag preservation program in Anne Arundel County, along with the local land trusts.
Yeah, so
Country, because it seems like there's a lot of protected land already protected that would be within your boundaries. I was just wondering how you really get more information on the already protected land would, and how that fits in with your refuge would be.
yeah, so we have that all mapped out, like the lands that are already protected in the counties, whether they're protected by ag programs, county ag programs, state ag programs, or state habitat programs or county habitat programs.
Well, how about private nonprofit?
Yeah, and private nonprofit lands as well. Whether they're conservation easements or if they're owned in fee. In the case of Anne Arundel County, Scenic Rivers Land Trust is the main, I think, local land trust for Anne Arundel, and they are members of the Southern Maryland Conservation Alliance. So we've been working with them, all along the way. As far as the ag programs in Anne Arundel, I don't think we've been working with them. We've been working with the county now. Whether it's been, the word's been getting down to their whatever county ag preservation program there might be. I don't know. I'm not aware at this time.
Because most of land below Route 214 is in rural state still, and a lot of it is in the county ag preservation program.
Yes. South County, it's beautiful.
And so but it seems to me that would be really something that you want to have coordination with.
Yes. So I don't know how many acres in that area are protected just by the county.
By
or
about
whether-
15,000 acres.
Yeah, or whether it's part of like the state program.
Oh, it's different. It's a separate program from.
Okay, okay. Yeah, so one thing we would have is those properties mapped, like we have that information, but coordinating directly with that program, I have not done that yet.
Great. So last call, any other last minute questions out there?
Looks like Gail.
Hi, thanks much. I'm coming a little late to the game on this, just learned about all this, and so I really don't know much about it yet. I will read all the information that you shared, but I'm just curious because I'm in St. Mary's County, and I'm looking at the McIntosh Run unit, and so much of that area along the northern edge of that is already heavily developed all the way up to the water. And I just am curious how a wildlife refuge functions in a already developed area.
Yeah, I am. So the important McIntosh Run is is the most important watershed within that that unit for the Fish and Wildlife Service because of the presence of the dwarf wedge mussel, the federally listed endangered dwarf wedge mussel. I think yes, and so it's a priority for us, and so I'm hopeful we're going to be able to get in there and get some good stuff done before it all turns black. So that's the idea there.
Well, Dan and Jennifer, thank you so much for taking so much time to talk to us all tonight. And thank you all for joining us. It's a great crowd. And I hope everybody will go out and send in comments on their personal behalfs and behalfs of their organization.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. And thanks to all of you. Thanks so much for turning out tonight to hear this. Much appreciated.